Good morning, folks. I'm here with Wednesday's lesson for you. Today is a double period, so there'll be a wee bit more. And let's get on with it. Okay, folks, here's exercise 1. And you'll notice that this formula has an A in it, a B in it, and a C in it. And we're going to ask you this time to make each of these the subject. So work 3 times with the same formula. And this one here has got 4 letters in it, and we're going to ask you to make each of these letters the subject. So you should be able to work through that okay. Okay, pause the video here. Okay, here are the answers for question 1. First we made A the subject, then B the subject, then C the subject. And you'll see that, of course, we have all the other letters, but each time it's in a slightly different form. And next I should do the answers to question 2. First part, making V and W the subject. Pause if you need to check the details here. C, here we are, we can make X the subject. And last of all, so each letter has a turn of being the subject of the formula. Here is the last answer. Now, some people would prefer to avoid having a negative Q in the bottom, so they would change all the signs, just to be aware that our formula are now sufficiently complicated that there may be alternative answers. And that's something, particularly if you're using a textbook, you need to get used to. Because if your answer is not exactly the same as the one in the back, it may be equivalent. So, for example, you may get this answer, which is actually equivalent to that. Okay. Now we've got used to using formula where, for example, we want to make X the subject and it's X squared. So in the last stage, we have X squared equals something, so then we do X's and we put a root in. But here, we're going to do the opposite. We want to make B the subject, but we've got root B. So at the end, once we've got square root of B equals something, we'll have to square both sides to get B itself. So let's see how that works. We write it the other way around, as we always do. We can take away C from each side so that we've got less left on the left side. We've still got 5 root B though, so we need to divide by 5. Here we are dividing by 5. And finally, we want to get B, so we have got to square that to get B. So we square the whole of the other side. So notice the brackets and the squaring of the whole of the other side. Let's have a look at another example with a square root sign in. This one's slightly different because the square root is going over the whole thing. So when we turn it this way around, we're ready to start. Now it's best to get rid of this square root early so that we can have these things free to move them around. So if we square this side, we get 4q plus t, but we get p squared on this side. So we square rooted this side to get rid of the root so that we can move the t over to this side, but the cost of doing that is we've got to square this side. So then simply we move the t minus t over to that side, and then we've got 4q, so q is that divided by 4. So let's make a note about this. To get rid of a square root, square both sides. To get rid of a cube root, unsurprisingly, you need to cube both sides. And we've got some examples to go in our notes jotters to show you how to do it. So this one, the cube root is just over the b, so we can work with that until the end and then cube this to get rid of the cube root and cube whatever we've got on the right hand side. So there we are, we've written it the other way around. We've taken away the 3cd as you would expect. We've got 7 cube root though, so let's divide by 7 to get just cube root. And finally, to get rid of the cube root, we have to cube everything. So there we are. That's the first example for the note. Second example, notice the difference here. If the root sign is over just one part, we can work with that right until the end. Whereas if it's over the whole thing, we want to get rid of that early so that we can separate the v and t. So write it the wrong way around as we would expect. square it. So we've got rid of the root sign on this side, but we've got w squared on this side. Now we can move the t over to that side. It's half of v, so we need to double everything to make that v. So if we double everything, we can do it like that, or we could have a version where that bracket was multiplied out. I'm just going to leave it there. Okay? And I think we have a third example for this note. No, we don't. It's time to go into exercise 2. Right. Okay. So pause the video here. Remember, if the root is over one thing, you can leave it till the end. If it's over more than one thing, you need to get rid of it early on so you can start moving terms from side to side. Okay folks, I'm going to go through the solutions to exercise 2 now. I've written out the full answers so that you can pause the video, and if you've got something that's not the same, you can work out where you went wrong. Or as I often say, you can let me know where I went wrong. So here's the first 2 questions. Pause if you need to. Second 2 questions. Again, check the answer first and look at the pause and look in more detail if you haven't got it right. Here's 5 and 6 just fitting on the page. And here is the answer to question 7. Okay. So the purpose of this exercise was to get you used to the fact that sometimes we have to deal with roots. And remember, if it's a root over just one letter, you can leave dealing with that till the end. Whereas if it's a root over more than one letter, you want to get rid of that early so that you can start pulling out the term that you want to be the subject. Now, this being a double period, we've got a bit more to do. Here we've got a fraction in our formula. We want to make x the subject. So we turn it the wrong way round as usual. If we want to get rid of that fraction, it's a half. So if we double that, that becomes x. But of course, that means we have to double everything else. So we get rid of a fraction by multiplying by the denominator, the number in the bottom. So if it's a half, we can turn it into x as long as we double everything else. So then x is 2p minus 2a. Okay, here's another example of a formula with a fraction in it. This time it's got 3/4 in it. So we start off turning it round, but we'd like to get rid of that 3/4. So to do that, we'd multiply this by 4 and there would just be 3 left. But of course that means we have to multiply that side by 4. So this is what we get. And we want a to be the subject, so we can divide by 3 and by b in a single step. And there we are. That's that one sorted out. So the rule with fractions is multiply by everything by the denominator. And that means the denominator disappears from the fraction, but everything else gets multiplied. So, adding to that big long note we've got about all the different things we have to deal with. Dealing with fractions, multiply by the denominator. Here's an example. It's got 1/7 and we want to make s the subject. So we turn it round to get started. And first it's good to get rid of that 7th. So if we multiply by 7, that'll just be s. But of course that and that have to be multiplied by 7, and this is what we get. So once we've got rid of the fractions, we can take the minus 7t over, we can move it over here, the 7t, so it's minus 7t, and that's the first one done. Second one, we want to make g the subject, so we turn it round. And the first stage is to get rid of the 2/5, so if we multiply by 5, that 5 will disappear, so you've got 2ag squared, but this and this will need to be multiplied by 5. So there we are. So next, we can add 5h to both sides. And finally, well, not quite finally, we can divide by 2a to give it just g squared on its own. This one's a wee bit longer, so you need to finish by putting in a square root. Okay, again, you can pause during this because that page turns slightly awkward. Right, so that's that one finished. I have a third example. Make d the subject. So write it the wrong way around. If we multiply by 7, we'll have 3 on this side, but we'll need to have 7 on that side. So that's got rid of the fractions. Still more to do though. because we want d in its own, so we can divide by 3b. We've got d cubed. We're still not there. So to get d, we need to put a cube root in. And that's the third example for the fraction done. So guess what? There's an exercise now, exercise 3, with some examples with fractions for you to go through. So remember, turn it round, get rid of the fraction by multiplying. Pause the video here and I'll go through the answers with you once you've done them. So here's the answers to exercise 3. I've underlined the answers so they're easy to pick out. If you haven't got the answer, look carefully at what you're doing. Okay, so you need to pause the video. First 2, then here's the answers to 3 and 4. And 5 and 6. Whoops, that's a wee bit squint. Make sure you can see them both. The answers to 5 and 6. And finally, number 7. Oops. There we are. Okay, so that's allowed you to check your work. Okay folks, we're making good progress through our topic on formulae, changing the subject. Hopefully you can see the connection with the algebra skills that will also help you with equations and inequations. So in some ways we're not learning anything new, we're simply applying our knowledge in a different way. There's still a wee bit more to do in this topic, but I appreciate the hard work that you're putting in to keep up. Okay, just got the exit question to get done, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye folks.